Dr. Walsh,
Dr. Ashenden, hello.
do you use your title much outside pretentious broadcasts?
I used to when I went on flights, just in case I got an upgrade.
I've
Um,
never been. I've
or,
never been upgraded on the grounds they've
or
been mistaken.
in the days of checks, I used to have it on the checkbook. Um, uh, Maybe hotel reservations, um, and yeah, well, there's just otherwise moments of pettiness when I want to assert that I'm not quite the moron I come across as being, or
Pettiness.
at least at least point wasn't quite the moron I come across as being most of the time. Not
Yeah,
very often, in other words. How about you?
pettiness and leverage, but it backfires all the time. Well, most of the time. Sometimes it doesn't. I mean, if you're in a hospital, it's very interesting. People say, so what kind are you? Then you tell them. Then they either sneer because you're not a scientist, or else they say, "Oh, thank God, a real doctor." Let's,
Mm.
what's your area of intellectual expertise? Because I'm just surrounded by scientific mechanics.
When I was
So,
doing when I was doing my PhD, I had I had two supervisors in the end. The one I wanted to be my supervisor, Howard Robinson, who ended up sacking me because I was drunk most of the time, but he didn't have a PhD. And I once said to him, how can you
yeah,
know, with a PhD, Gavin, it's you're on your own most of the time. But I said to him over a glass of wine once, I said, what gives you the right to supervise me on my PhD when you haven't got one? He said, well, I think of myself as like a consultant. I'm Mr. Robinson. And then he said to me, but of course I could always submit my first book and get a PhD from that. And I said, the Viva will be dodgy, Howard.
very very funny. My story is the same but different. My supervisor was one of the most intelligent men in the country. Didn't have a PhD because he had a B Lit from Oxford, which was better than a PhD.
Mm,
And we had three supervisions. First
mm,
one was, let's plan this thing. Second one was, here's my thesis, to which he said, that's nonsense, that's dreadful, it's so bad, I can't be associated with it. And I said, but it's true. Nice, I don't want to know, and disappeared. And then I worked by myself until I submitted it, and at the end of it he said, oh, I think you're probably right. So I did the whole thing without
really?
supervision and under a mister, but such a I mean, he was
Well,
Iris Murdoch's favourite
yeah.
research
I
pupil.
mean, I
So
remember you
no,
mentioning that actually. Yeah,
yeah, no, he was
Howard
clever.
Howard was smart enough, and he was of the similar Oxford point of view that the Oxford BA is just as
Oh,
good
this
as
was a
a
B.
PhD
This
anywhere
is
else.
the yeah, this is the B Lit. I mean, this was so he'd
Yeah, yeah,
done a four year research degree, but in those days, in terms of anything from Oxford or Cambridge was better than anything from anywhere else. So it wasn't.
yeah.
But in this particular case, he really. I mean, when he died, he was fated all around the world. He was a very, very, very clever man. I mean, just really was. I mean, I
Howard
wasn't.
is Howard is still with us, and he's converted to Catholicism, I think.
Oh, he might listen to us.
He was yeah, I don't know about that. He was a Berkeleian idealist, still is a Berkeleian idealist. So
Hmm.
he didn't believe that his body existed as a physical thing, and yet he was the world's biggest hypochondriac, which I thought was quite funny. And I was driving him once from Liverpool to Oxford, and he was sat like this, all hunched up, and he kept saying, "You're too close to the car in front. You're too close to the car in front." And I said, "What are you bothered about, Howard? You don't really think it exists, do you?" And quick as a flash, he said, "No, but the phenomena are just as risky." Which is like
Phenomenological,
Johnson was kicking the stone at that point.
a phenomenological idealist. Well, no easier to drive with. So we're going to talk today about try and take our conversation from last week on a bit about and look at. I'm going to, although this is provocative, I'm going to talk about a Judeo-Christian anthropology. If you put the word Judeo on, the Palestinians think you're a Zionist, but I'm going to do it anyway um, because it's a holistic thing that comes from the first and second covenants. So it's an indicate. It's not an indication of what I think about Gaza. It's an indication I think the Bible as a whole is what gives us our worldview. And so we might talk about. Sorry, go on.
And we're going to circle round and talk about Nazis and Devizes at some point.
We're going to end up by. I've asked you if you'll read your very, very, very sardonic essay on the Nazi headquarters in Devizes. I think it's terribly funny, and because the serious side of it is where our Nazis. I got an email this morning from a cross woman campaigner for Christian womanhood who produced a picture of, I don't know, 50 women with their much of all of them clutching things to cover their breasts, but with their tops stripped off, with Nazis behind them and the holes that have been dug for their bodies, which they were about to be executed in front of them. And this woman said, "You idiots! These are what real Nazis look like. Can't you tell the difference?" And it is, of course, the most chilling photograph, particularly when you looked at the faces of the women who knew perfectly well they were going to have bullets to the back of the head and their bodies were tumbling into the thing. So that's real Nazism. Anyway, we can talk about the Nazis and Devizes as a way of disrespecting the people who think that there are Nazis in Devizes. Although, have you found out why the building looks like that yet?
I don't want to know. It's like the
No,
identity
no.
of Jack the Ripper. If I ever knew, I wouldn't want to
Well,
know.
you'd lose all interest. Yes. No. Let's keep the mystery of the relationship with you and the architecture.
Yeah.
So, shall we start off with how many prostrations you do in the morning before the Blessed Sacrament and why?
Okay. Only on. I genuflect, which hardly seems sufficient.
No, but it's a start, isn't it? So let's begin with that. Genuflection and bowing are very important. I want to go. Can I go via Freud?
Yes, please do.
But not very far, because what we're about to talk about is much more interesting. And so I'm about to get into the negative side of things, and I very much want to do the positive side of things. I want to do the cataphatic, not the apophatic. So one of the reasons why Freud's a fraud. I mean, he's very clever in terms of the way in which he maps, like Jung. He does a very interesting job of mapping consciousness and unconsciousness. And in his case, he gave us the simplistic but very effective picture of ego, superego, and id, which I think I had it best described by a Jesuit consultant psychologist as, imagine a wrestling ring, and in the wrestling ring you have a sex-craved chimpanzee and one of those very fierce Southern Baptist great-grandmothers with knitting needles and spectacles who tells the world what to think and what to do and makes you feel guilty about everything. And the referee is you. It's your ego. And you're about to referee this completely unequal contest in completely different terms between the sex-crazed chimpanzee and the morally outraged grandmother. And he said that's a picture of what we're like, because we have in us the id driven by sex as far as Freud was concerned, and utterly unrestrained, undisciplined, undisciplinable.
Mm.
And yet another part of us, the superego, what you might call a conscience, but the kind of the controlling voice upstairs that does all the guilt stuff, tries to control this largely sex-crazed, animalistic, anarchist energy with guilt. And in the middle of it, you have the utterly incompetent ego, and neither of them can see each other very well. So the ego actually can't see to deal with the sex-crazed, animalistic, but knows they're there. And in this position of almost relative impotence, the ego has to arbitrate between anarchistic, sexually impulsed energies and a really fierce, vicious moral conscience in response to it. And out of that chaos, said Freud, it's not a bad picture because there are elements of that which are true. Jung's was different, but the reason I mention it is because that even in this simplistic way was that Freud was so cross with God. Mainly we think because in fin de siècle Vienna, his father as a Jew was very disrespected by the bourgeois Catholic Viennese, and had to keep on crossing the road. I mean, Jews weren't allowed to be on the same pavement as good Viennese Catholics were.
Mm.
And there's a sense that Freud was so angry with his humiliated father that he wanted to destroy the father of the Viennese Catholics, who is, of course, God.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously not at a conscious level, because he never admits to it, but there's a sense that he therefore sets out deliberately to destroy the notion of God, and does it by constructing false arguments. Although he's quite clever psychologically, mind you, he fixed an awful lot of his experiments, such as they were. He spent some time in a psychiatric institution, and there he saw people doing compulsive physical acts. So, I mean, we might actually get on to why people do compulsive physical acts in relation to proper physical acts that we want to use for worship and spirituality, which we're going to head towards. But so we have, if you like, the kind of the real and the shadow, or the authentic and the inauthentic, or the constructive and the perverse, but because they're both there. And anyway, he saw them, washing their hands compulsively and bowing and shuffling and doing this kind of this terribly mad choreography. And he said, "I know where I've seen that before, in the liturgy of the cathedral in Vienna. This is religious stuff."
Mm.
So he posited, he as with Feuerbach, he turned the telescope the wrong way around and got the projection the wrong way around to say, well, this is the norm. And the Catholic liturgy is a kind of bonkers derivative, or a slightly more covert derivative of this. So essentially, if this is normative mad behavior, then Catholic liturgy is covert mad behavior. And it's also done by people who are compulsively mentally ill. And this just proves that religion is a neurosis, but in terms of the Catholic Church, beautifully disguised artistically. That's the cunningness of it. And so he then sets this idea running. So there are two ideas that Freud has, both of which I think are really inadequate. And then you have to ask, how was it he managed to capture the imagination of a whole Western culture? And it can only have been because Western culture wanted to be captured by these two ideas. So it was only too happy, first of all, to accept that all our behavior is ultimately the product of sexual frustration or sexual incompetence or inadequacy or incontinence, whatever you want to do. And that at the same time, all religious experience comes from a form of madness and is a sign of severe neuroticism. And our society grabbed both these ideas, which of course are both terribly dangerous to human beings and not true. I mean, there are slivers of truth in them, as with all truth has a sliver of truth in it. But the sliver is so small compared to what he was, the edifice, the enormous edifice he was making on it. And interestingly enough, it was only really halfway through my career teaching psychology that we had this incredible shift. I watched it happen. I thought, wow, this is a moment of immense cultural interest. We had this shift from having adored and treated Jung as a complete authority. I mean, essentially, all my academic colleagues were kind of second and third rate Freudians. I mean, they'd read a bit of Freud. They'd all read a bit. They knew a bit or heard a bit. And without any question at all, they said, this must be all true. And just halfway through, Jung was beginning to come through. And one of the reasons I became a Jungian and was, and therefore changed my views on sexuality to secular views, from which I had to come back, was because Jung appeared to be the mean. Okay, so there's our first metaphysical or physical interruption, which we kind of expected to take place.
Oh.
So the reason that I moved, one of the reasons why I became a Jungian was because the psychological climate was just, and the sociological climate was just becoming interested in Jung. And he changed Freud's presupposition on religion. Freud had made it the basis of all neurosis and oncoming madness. If you had a religious experience, it was a sign that you were mentally unwell or unstable. And Jung turned that aspect completely around and said that, in fact, the problem that that Freud had identified, which was of aspects of the unconscious not being able to speak to each other, and particularly not having proper access to the consciousness. Everyone knows what that's like in terms of dreams. Dreams are the best example we have of something deep inside me, inarticulate and irrational, trying to talk to my articulate, rational bit, which appears suddenly not to be as strong or as real as the inarticulate, irrational, unconscious dream bit. And Freud, so Jung said, religious symbolism is the only language that these two parts of you have in common. So your consciousness, your conscious self, and your unconscious self can create some kind of handshake for the good of your holistic integration if they use religious archetypes to do it. So we're back to your phenomenologist. This whether or not there's ultimate reality, there is provisional. Is that the right word? Provisional, conditional, temporary, substitute reality, which is, so we weren't saying about the ultimate, but we do know about the kind of immanent reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that was so interesting that I thought, well, I can use Jung in order to persuade people they need to develop a facility of talking about God, and to some extent that worked. Let's go back to bowing and scraping and compulsive behavior, because you've got things to say about the body and spirituality and embodied spirituality as opposed to the dominance of the mind we were talking about last week.
Yeah. Well, last week we were talking about the Cartesian error, or two Cartesian errors. The first of which you've already mentioned, which is this idea that human persons are two things, one of which we can call the mind, the other of which we can call the body, that they somehow mysteriously interact. The other Cartesian error that we talked about last week was about the nature of interaction and what causality is. And that Descartes, certainly when it comes to bodies, is operating with a kind of mechanistic account of causality, which at the time was relatively new, or at least was a departure from what the scholastics and Aquinas, and even going back to Aristotle, thought. So the problem with Descartes, or the first of those problems with Descartes, is that he kind of makes the mind a kind of adjunct to the body, or something that's contingently or accidentally associated with the body, but which is itself completely hived off from it and which is private. My thoughts are not something which you have access to, and it's kind of mysterious on a Cartesian view how my body has access to them as well, in the forms of being able to express what those thoughts are. This week, I've been thinking about going back the other way. I mentioned last week a philosopher called Merleau-Ponty, who was a contemporary, even from student days, of Sartre and de Beauvoir, who is a phenomenologist, but a phenomenologist who says that a proper phenomenology has to make the body, if you like, logically prior to the mind. So it's a kind of reverse. It's a reversal of what Descartes says.
Is
So,
that predicated on materialism, or I mean, on what basis would you choose to do that?
true to do what? Sorry, Gavin.
On what basis would you choose to reverse the priority of mind and body by saying let's do body first? Is it just materialism? You know,
No,
we know the body's here because we.
no, because he's not. I think you can make the points and be ontologically neutral about what the body is. You're not committed to saying it's composed of matter, but you are committed to a notion of embodiment.
I do.
And
I'm very excited by the idea of ontological neutrality. Seems to me to be a kind of a playroom where you can
they
do
used,
all kinds of things hypothetically.
they used to call it topic neutrality. They used to say matter, whatever matter turns out to be, or bodies, whatever
Yeah.
bodies turn out to be. He says, for example, that the spoken word is actually the completion of a thought.
Right.
So the spoken word, which is a bodily activity, is actually what makes thought possible in the first place, on that view.
That's what Peterson says. You can't have thoughts unless you can speak them out. And the
Yeah,
speaking, he doesn't say it like that, but I wonder if he's consciously saying the same thing. It's certainly true.
and it's very familiar from the later Wittgenstein as well,
Yeah, yeah.
with whom I was listening to a discussion about this last night, actually. But and Merleau Merleau-Ponty was very disrespectful of Wittgenstein's later philosophy and didn't seem to understand it, but didn't appreciate that there was kind of a significant complementarity, if not overlap, between their own theories about what language was. Merleau-Ponty was interesting because he took childhood very seriously and the notion of children's play very seriously. And he had worked in that area. He'd worked as a child psychologist. And
Mm.
it said that it's very interesting with children that children have no conception of themselves as being hived off, or they have no conception of the other person as being distinct
No.
from themselves. And that
Have
that's
you?
something they come to learn. So it's a kind of reversal of the Cartesian position, if you like. You gradually come to. Sorry, Gavin. Go on.
I beg your pardon. You say such interesting things, and then I want to expand on the interesting thing you said, but not stop you saying the rest. Uh, there's a very interesting book called Families and How to Survive Them, which is
Yeah.
a manual written by John Cleese and a very competent, now dead, family therapist called Robin Skinner.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, and
I know
one of
it.
its one of its beauties is it's full of cartoons. I used to use it as a book in one of my reading courses. But there, Skinner is very clear about the difficulties that children have in learning that everybody else is separate from their ego.
Yes.
Even sucking at the mother's breast, it assumes that the
Yeah.
breast and the mother and the milk are an extension of its own right to exist. I mean, they're kind of an accidental extension of what it takes to feed. The
Yeah.
notion that the mother might have a separate personality or be a separate person
And
is such a shock, and is part of the whole maturation process
that's right.
psychologically.
It's not narcissism or selfishness on the part of the child. It's kind of more of a category error.
It's just a stage in the developmental journey from one perception of reality to a more holistic perception of reality.
Yeah. So if your starting point is a Cartesian view of the self, then you have to explain childhood.
Right.
And that's just one example that you would get from Merleau-Ponty. The idea is basically that you articulate the world not simply in terms of thoughts, but in terms of movement, and the thoughts themselves can only be articulated if there is some logically prior set of behaviors.
Mhm.
So it's a reverse Cartesian or an inversion of Cartesianism. Now, why it should be interesting to Catholics? Well, it should be interesting to Catholics because it kind of gives a certain sense, if it were needed, to notions of sacramentality and ritual and what we're doing
Mm.
with stuff.
It's all
And
about embodiment, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
uh,
the sacrament is the materialistic embodiment. Is not quite the right word. It's the it's the materialistic expression of a spiritual reality in which they both come to
yeah,
interpenetrate and infuse each other.
that's
So,
right.
so hang on, just so I've got this right, can you tell me, make sure I can think this through? So are we saying that the nature of sacramental reality, which Catholics understand intuitively, even if not rationally, how do you rationalize it, is parallel to the process by which the completion of a thought has to be a word,
I think,
because
yeah,
there's got to be a tangible material um, presentation of the concept of the theoretical or the conceptual, whatever it is. In other words, matter and spirit or thought and word have to go together. They belong to each other in order to function properly. Is that what we're saying?
yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, in the sacraments, you have an intensification of God's presence, and it's an intensification made possible by the existence of the material stuff you're using, whether it's water or water would be the obvious case. Also, obviously, in the Eucharist as well, the altar bread and the wine. Um, and similarly with thought, there's a kind of the thought cannot be completed without some bodily stuff going on. Most obviously, the spoken word. Um, so yeah, I think there is at least a parallel there.
And one of the great things about this
Miller
is
he was a Catholic. He was raised a Catholic, but his
right.
politics kind of took over. He was a Marxist for a while before becoming disillusioned with that. So,
And we were
it's not perhaps accidental if you look at the facts of his early life that he kind of did a kind of new version of phenomenology, which very Catholic can be looked at in a very Catholic way, I think.
and we were talking about one of the dangers of Cartesianism being the side effect of the emergence of Gnosticism, and that means that essentially you dispose of physical reality and you give preference to the conceptual or
Yeah,
to the thoughtful. And one of the reasons why Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, is so much safer is because it won't allow matter to be treated as something second class or worse, evil.
no,
Particularly, it gives it a perhaps a neutrality, or better than that, a goodness. And of course, this works when you understand that everything holding together in Christ. In Christ, all things hold together. So if the things are an aspect of Christ Himself, in
yeah,
which Christ dwells at some level of intensity or another.
yeah,
So I've always thought that focus and intensity are quite good ways of describing it. So
yeah,
in the ground under my feet is a gift from Christ, and indeed I'm almost standing on Christ's palm of Christ's hand,
yeah,
because He gives the matter under my feet to allow me physical autonomy to move. But when it comes to the Eucharist, that physical presence, or the of Christ inhering in the matter, intensifies umpteenfold,
yeah.
to the point where you get um, the sort of non-dilute, concentrated Christ. That's what I'm looking for.
It's it's,
In
int-
the in,
it's intensification, not
yeah,
intervention. Yes, it's an
yes, that's right.
intensification of Christ's presence or the presence of the Word, which is already there. And were it not there, you wouldn't have the matter.
Absolutely. Did you say intensification, not intervention? If you did,
Yeah,
that was very clever.
yeah.
That's very clever.
If you
Yeah,
think
it's
of it
good.
as being an intervention, then
Yeah.
you're kind of giving a certain status to matter which it doesn't deserve.
Yes.
Matter's only matter because God's at work in matter.
Yeah. In Him, all things hold together.
Absolutely.
In Him, all things were made, as John says in the prologue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's why last week I was talking about the second of Descartes' errors, or at least interpreters of Descartes, when it comes to this question about how mind and body interact if they're two completely different and ontologically distinct substances. Um, what's the causal mechanism there? It's mysterious. It's not if you have that view of causation as being kind of the operation of God in the world. Um, it's not mysterious at all.
Right. And do we go from here to the prostrations and genuflections of the Eastern Orthodox monk, or are there intervening stages?
Can I say two things before we do, which I think are relevant?
Hmm.
The first is Merleau-Ponty and others. Roger Scruton is very good about this in the book he wrote on sexual desire. It's about, and this is one of the reasons why what happened during lockdown was so offensive to me. And it comes down to the metaphysics of the face, if you like. Merleau-Ponty and phenomenologists who follow him, those who believe in bodily intentionality, say in the face, in the human face, you do not just see a representation of the soul, you see where the soul is residing.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
And so during lockdown, when we were instructed to go outside and cover up our faces, that was actually an abnegation of the human soul.
Although
Because
I'd like to put
my point of view. The second thing
I,
I wanted to say, Gavin,
before you do whole second thing, because I've got a caveat to the first thing.
okay,
Well, I think
I'm not sure I'm going
so.
to like this, but go on.
Yeah, no, I think you are. It's all right. No, it's. I think it's a reasonable development. I can't see how you can't like it. I think it's true. I'm sure you like the truth. So let me put it as a question rather than a statement. Is it not the fact that we see more of the soul and the enfaced soul in people who are older than in younger, leaving the innocence of children aside for the moment? Because
Mm,
but so I mean, I think that
yes,
people under the age of 45, to some extent, are masked
yeah,
by youth or by beauty or because what's inside has not yet embossed the face from the inside to the point where you could see it on the outside. But when you get to our age, the cumulative moral decisions that we've made begin to show on the face. In a way, one doesn't know. I mean, in the eyes, in expressions, I mean, no one. I don't know how you measure it, but instinctively, intuitively, we know. And above all, the eyes. My goodness me, the eyes of some people go back no distance at all. They're blanks. I mean, they're terrifying. You see some eyes on television, in films, or in, you think there's nobody there. There's nobody at home. This is awful. And you see other people whose eyes go back a million miles, and you think, wow, what's in there? That's amazing. And isn't that what you're talking about in terms of the
Very much,
ensouledness?
very much so. I mean, we think of the soul as being eternal, and yes, okay, fair enough, it is. But on the other hand, it manages, and I think the word we used last week was distill. It manages to distill itself in the physicality of the human face and body overall. And I think
Great
that's
phrases.
very interesting.
Great phrases, Dr. Walsh. Very good. I love the language. Very good indeed. Yeah. What's the other thing?
The second thing I was going to say was, I remember when I was in hospital nearly 2 years ago now. There was an elderly gentleman in the bed opposite me on the high dependency ward in Bath, and it was fairly obvious he wasn't going to make it. And his physical deterioration over, I think he was there for about 4 days before he passed away in front of me, actually, was quite pronounced. I mean, you could almost see him wasting away. But he had a brother who visited him, and I think his brother was quite well to do. His brother was flying in from all places to make sure he could spend some time with his brother. And his brother said to, I think it was his daughter, so it would be the niece of the gentleman who wasn't well. He said, and I couldn't even speak at this point. I was very poorly myself, but I heard him say to his daughter, when you think about it, it's actually amazing how much of the soul of the person is revealed just by when they touch their own face. Because this guy was incapable of doing that. And I thought he's saying something very deep there about the whole metaphysics of the gesture and what lies behind it. And Merleau-Ponty kind of has not an explanation of that, but notices. Well, he does have explanations of it, but we won't worry about that now. But just what seem to be random gestures are kind of disclosures of a deeper interiority in a way that the Cartesian picture can't make sense of.
Right.
But earlier pictures of the self probably could, and certainly the Christian conception of the self obviously does because it's true. So that was the second thought. It's a bit anecdotal, but it's just something that's kind of stuck with me and I think is relevant to what we're talking about.
Anecdotal is the point where we are able to tell the truths we have conceptually in story fashion, and they're often much more powerful for that.
And the other point that Merleau-Ponty makes, and is a very interesting one, and something I noticed myself, although I didn't connect it to his writing, when I was poorly and unable to walk, I was highly dependent on other people for even the most rudimentary things. You can tell that there is a phenomenology to what the body does. That what the body does enters into our consciousness, if you like, in ways which are ways of necessity. Because when you are that incapacitated, your world shrinks, and your world just becomes what your body can and cannot do, and you cannot think in ways. The idea of someone who can lie in bed who can't move about, that this is some kind of gift because they can have books read to them or they can think, not possible. When you lose physicality to that extent, your mind goes as well.
I'm sure that's true. And I mean, I've never got over the shock of my father's dead body when I arrived just after he died in hospital. And my anger at the outrageousness of the way his body impersonated him, his dead body impersonated him badly.
Yeah.
So it was quite clearly him, but there was such an important bit missing. I don't mean just in movement, because it would have in sleep. It's there. I mean, that's what's so interesting, that in sleep the soul is still imprinting itself on the body, and they are one still. But the moment the soul leaves the body is a kind of, it's almost blasphemous. It's pretending to be the person without having any claim to it whatsoever because it's
Yeah,
no longer ensouled. And I remember thinking, I didn't realize the soul and the mind were so nuclearly powerful in the body. I'm so used to thinking of a Z person in a similar way to someone asleep, but it's utterly, utterly revoltingly different.
because you're
And
not just talking about the departure of the soul. You're talking of, well, let's put it a different way. The departure of the soul somehow seems to alter what's left behind.
it completely alters it. It alters it disproportionately. It's that
Yeah,
disproportion I'm
it's
talking.
more than just an absence. It's almost
Right.
an
Yeah,
altruism.
absolutely. It's almost it's almost like it's this magic in reverse.
Yeah,
And it's very hard to find the right kind of language, but but it's so shocking, which is one of the reasons why it's important people should see dead bodies and why we should have our dead at home with us, so that we can begin to grow in our perception of how important life is in comparison to the mockery of a body without. Well, now I'm going to become Cartesian, without a body, without a person in it, because it's not in it. It's the perichoresis, it's the interpenetration, that notion, that Trinitarian word the early Church Fathers use, which is so
yeah.
important.
It's a very specific type of containment. Yes.
Yeah, or interrelationship. So
We
where
were
do we
we
go?
were
Is it,
we were talking before we started recording about the discussion between Richard Dawkins and Rowan
yeah,
Williams, which I enjoyed actually. Although Dawkins just can't escape this mechanistic view of the world that he's got, which is, I think Williams did his absolute best. Dawkins seems to think, in fact, no, he doesn't seem to think. He just does think that the whole idea of being a religious person or a Christian is to complete an investigation, whereas in fact it's not. It's to actually cultivate a relationship with our Lord. But Dawkins keeps saying things like, well, this poetry in reality and the existence of God would add nothing to that. It's just another level of explanation we don't need, without realizing that God's in the explanations that he's already got.
I've got two analogies which I think explain why Dawkins is so lame at this point. It's not his fault, and they're either radio bandwidth. You need to have an FM, or else it's colours of the rainbow. You need
Oh,
more
yes,
than you know. But if you're missing enough of it, it just doesn't make any sense. And quite clearly, Dawkins is completely missing any mythological, pneumatological, what that kind of bit. And I was talking to a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine who taught my son classics at school at his school. Got a very funny story about the Southeastern Public Schools classics reading competition, which he asked me to invigilate in at one point. But that's a big. That's the kind of thing for boring old farts and whiskey late at night. But he too, I think, we were discussing about his sense of restricted ability to appreciate, to know, to recognize, to respond to what you and I would call the metaphysical. So very, very clever, immensely well educated, as well, just a good, well-rounded man of the best quality. But like Dawkins, because there's nothing to do with intelligence, it's missing a gear, missing a facility, missing a range, missing a bandwidth, and it didn't matter how much Rowan Williams very, very skillfully talked about the bridge between, well, it's McGilchrist again, isn't it? Between measurement and meaning. It's almost as if, in McGilchrist's terms, Dawkins has only half a brain working. He's got the measurement thing down to a T. He's a great expert in measurement, but meaning,
Yeah.
it's just a blank to him. And so, of course, he thinks we've made it up. I mean, in that sense, he's a perfect Freudian. We've imagined this as some kind of madness, and we look at him and say, "But you've only got half a brain."
Well,
And
he seems to think the existence of God is just some fact in addition to all the other facts there are.
well, a bad, untrue fact superimposed upon
Yeah.
good facts.
Whereas
Yes.
in fact, that's not the Christian sensibility at all.
No.
It's like
No.
trying to explain the color. colour red to someone who's only ever lived in a black and white room? I mean,
Yes, I mean they would think you're stupid. They would think, what are these words you're trying to use? They've got no bearing on reality whatsoever. Stop it! You're annoying me.
the reason I mentioned the conversation was that I thought that Rowan Williams in that did a very good job of, or a very good and concise explanation of um, uh, the Greek theory of the ancient Greek theory of the person as
Mm,
spirit versus soul versus body.
mm,
I thought he
mm.
summed that up very well. So that was kind of relevant to what we were talking about. So that's why I
Yeah.
mentioned it.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
But going back to Dawkins, because I like to put the boot in when I can. Um, he does. People get the fine tuning argument wrong. I think they don't appreciate just how they don't quite appreciate that the argument is twofold. Now, the fine tuning argument, as most people will know, is the argument that if God doesn't exist, then the fact that the universe is set up to sustain human consciousness or consciousness at all is just ridiculously improbable. But what's also improbable is how consciousness could be fine tuned in order to actually understand the fine tuning argument. You've got the fine tuning of the universe, but you could have a consciousness which didn't really understood what the fine tuning argument was, or didn't understand, or to which the universe was unintelligible. If I could,
If that's it's Lewis's wonderful paragraph where he says, if there was no meaning in the universe, we wouldn't know, we wouldn't have the concept of meaning to have a conversation about there being no meaning.
yes, that's right. Yeah, that's another way of putting it, I guess. But what I'm saying is there's two fine tunings going on. There's the fine tuning of the
Yeah.
universe to sustain consciousness, and there's the fine tuning of consciousness to find the whole thing wonderful in the first place. So Dawkins talks about this thing, and I think he's got a podcast called The Poetry of Reality. Is that right? And reality has this poetical quality to it. You don't need God to explain that. Okay, all right, but don't you need some kind of interpretation? Isn't it baffling to Dawkins that you can interpret the poetry in the first place?
It's much more exciting than that. It's Barrow, who was a professor at my university, and I used to ask him to give lectures in my. But it's the anthropic principle. It's this
Right.
wonderful idea that astronomers have got together to say that we're not just casual bystanders who happen, as you say, to have the to be what's the beneficent? What's the word I'm looking for? Beneficiaries. We're not just beneficiaries of the fine tuning. We're actually here to observe the universe, and it's only in our observation of the universe that the universe finds its meaning.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but that's such an extraordinary idea. It's a bit like, there is no point in having a play unless there's an audience. The audience are absolutely, it's like that wonderful. Can you remember that quatrain about the tree, the philosopher who finds it odd because there's a tree in the quad?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I keep on. I
Yeah.
keep on telling
Um,
myself you must be able to produce this at will, and I can't.
yeah. Wait. Yeah.
Do you find it exceedingly
God
odd?
replies, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. I
we'll
can't.
have to come back to it. We'll put it in the show notes.
That proves we don't rehearse this.
Yes.
Um, where,
Yes,
where,
if we were really showing off, we'd come with a few bon
yes.
mots. We could just.
No. No. It's a kind of. We aren't merely passive observers of what's going on. We are actually, our observation is relevant to what's happening, or relevant to anything happening at all. And does that not suggest that perhaps the idea that the universe is created moment to moment in some divine mind is
Well, that's true, but the journey that it sends me in is this extraordinary act of, is it devolution? I don't think it's quite that. Where God God's love so overflows
mm,
that he wants us to be present, to enjoy him, to praise him, but he's made the whole universe
yeah.
in order to give us a place to become to start to make the journey of becoming aware of him and to fall
That
in love with him.
that was something that I thought Rowan Williams was very good on in that discussion when Dawkins was. They were talking about the evolution of consciousness,
Mm.
and Dawkins was prepared to concede that it was kind of a slightly strange thing that consciousness suddenly emerges. The reductionists always use this thing about it's an emergent property, as if calling it something has explained it, you know.
Yeah.
And Williams, if I remember correctly, made the point. Well, he doesn't look at it like that. He says what's happening with the emergence of consciousness is that this is part of God's loyalty to us finite beings. As he's kind of no, that's right. The discussion was about life after death, wasn't it? That's right. Sorry, let me reframe it. Dawkins says that if all there is to consciousness, if consciousness is just an emergent property of brains, then there's no reason to believe in life after death. And William's reply is that, well, that's true, but for a Christian, once the consciousness is there, God has a certain loyalty to maintain it post-death.
Yeah, that's right. And there's
I
a parallel.
don't think Dawkins had a real reply.
No,
To
he
that.
said, well, I mean, he ought to lie asleep at night and worry about that, but I don't think he's aware enough to do it. Isn't there a parallel too between Newman's development of doctrine argument, the acorn and becoming the tree, and this? It's the same paradigm. You've got a kind of concentrated beginning, which only makes sense when you see it in full development. So the universe has a singularity, a beginning, and in periods of time we can't even begin to conceive of, and space too, which we can't conceive of. I heard the other day that if you compressed space travel so that you could do 1 light year space travel in a second, it would still take something like about 500 years to get to Alpha Centauri by spaceship traveling at that speed. I mean, but isn't it the same that the enormous, the unbelievable, the unimaginable periods of time and space in the development of the universe are the raw material out of which God wants to bring us to the point of saying, I adore you, Sanctus, 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 that the movement from the singularity to the apocalypse takes up this embarrassment de richesse of space and time. He just takes the most enormous amount of stuff to put us on this little planet where our consciousness can then come to a point where we're lost in a mutuality of love with him. It's just the most generous project. He doesn't skimp on the time and the space.
No, he doesn't. And I'm going to say something else about Dawkins in that, which is that he has a completely mangled and stupid conception of what divine simplicity is.
Oh, wasn't that nonsense? That was just so. I mean, yeah.
That something that is complex can only come about by something that's even more complex. Which, by the way, he doesn't apply to what he calls the primordial ooze, which he then said.
No, I was going to say he got involved in a total self-contradiction with his own discipline.
Exactly. And what he calls complexity, I would call contingency and degradability.
Very good. Yeah.
That's what simplicity doesn't mean without depth. It simply means that God, as we understand him to be, can't have pieces and can't degrade and can't change.
Yeah.
That's all it means.
Yeah.
Very
good.
A circle is pretty simple, hard to draw, but pretty simple.
Yes.
But the mathematics of the circle aren't that simple. There's a certain, and also it's not even true in language and in scientific explanation. The resolution of complex into the simple is taken to be a sign of scientific and linguistic beauty, isn't it? Certainly in mathematics.
Absolutely. Well, and also philosophically, the simpler something you can make something, the more intelligently you appear to have grasped it.
Yeah. It's not
I mean, it takes a third-rate person to present, which I'm always afraid of being, to present a complex idea in a complex way, but to present a complex idea in a way that is graspable takes real intelligence.
I'd like to present simple arguments in complex ways, because by the time I've done that, I might have actually understood what the simple thing was.
Oh yeah, but you're on a journey. But I mean, that you're making a special exception for yourself.
I'm playing.
You want to go for a long walk in the intellectual countryside.
Yeah, true. But sorry, Gavin.
Let's go to the prostrating monk, or we'll run out of time.
Sorry, yes, you're prostrating. Yes, go on.
Well, it's just that one of the things that I was very surprised at was when I first came across Eastern Christian spirituality amongst the Orthodox, was the fact that monks as part of their praying, do prostration. So
mm,
they make the sign of the cross and they touch themselves and they bend down and touch the floor. And they do this athletically repetitive prostration, which is very beautiful. I mean, it has an exquisite beauty to it. And I mean, I had to get to the point where, as a Protestant, I didn't like the repetition of the Lord's Prayer in liturgy. I remember the first time I came across Cranmer doing it twice in a service. I thought, we've done this. What do you mean? Why are you repeating it?
mm,
I don't tell you, it's a very interesting question as to why I was so hyper alert to repetition in that critical way. But that's a slightly different argument too. The fact that by doing these bodily actions, the monk was expressing adoration, humility, dependence, love, obedience, really, discipline, allowing God, the Holy Spirit, to discipline his body so that it did a dance of love. It struck me it was no different at all from the choreography of ballet, except that it was simpler movements, and we've already agreed there's nothing wrong with simplicity. But actually, these repetitive prostrations were part of the hesychastic prayer tradition, where you repeat things, but in a way, in order to allow them to become ingrained more deeply, not in order, as the Bible says, to
yeah,
wake up a deaf God who won't hear unless you go on shouting at him, which is the criticism of repetition that the Bible quite rightly has. But not all repetition is vain repetition. This is choreographed, beautiful, like someone saying "I love you" more than once. It deepens it. It expands it like the ripples of a stone in a pond. The
yeah,
fact that they're the same doesn't make them any less beautiful. In fact, sometimes the more of them, the more beauty there is. So the repetitive words of "I love you," the repetitive prostrations of the monk, but it was the fact that unlike the Cartesian West, where we limit it to words, it's extended to the whole of the body, and
absolutely.
therefore liturgy itself becomes an extension of it. The very thing that Freud got so angry with and wanted to parody. And again, if Satan's involved, you would expect that degree of anger and parody.
Mm,
Um, was suddenly liturgy becomes the most beautiful way of embodying love and adoration and service, moving it from the heart through the dimensions of actualité
mm,
into phenomena.
That's very, very Merleau-Ponty, that analysis, actually.
I thought you'd like it.
Yeah, I do like it. I like that you mentioned dance. I've always thought people should write more on the philosophy of dance. And I think the word is sonesthetics, isn't it? The
Yeah,
aesthetic.
as long as they don't bring it into the mass, that's all.
No, 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 no. I mean, I think of dance as being a kind of creative engagement with the laws that you can't alter. So it's extremely important that dance is rule governed, but it's within the rules that the creativity is allowed to play.
Yes, which is takes us back to, wasn't it extraordinary the way that the degradation of dancing that took place in the 60s and the 70s?
Yeah,
This incoherent, this utterly incoherent, solipsistic, anarchistic series of ugly movements,
yeah.
which represented the total destruction of a culture
It,
of
it,
beautiful dance.
it moved from a choreography of I don't know what choreography of cooperation to something far more narcissistic. Yes.
Yeah, yes, there was no. Well, I love that choreography of cooperation. That's very good. Yeah, yeah.
And obviously, love is cooperative, so it was kind of also it marks a move from love to sex. Actually,
Yes, yes, it did, but it was a part of that a degradation. Yeah.
what I used to do, I'm trying to get back into it now. I can walk again, but when I used to do a lot of running, I remember at my running club, people started buying these smartwatches, these Garmin things.
Mm,
Well, it's commonplace now, but back then it was kind of.
yeah.
And I always used to think they were reducing their run to numbers. So, there's what was your heart rate? How many miles have we done? What was your pace? I used to think there was something vulgar about it. But now I think you can have all the numbers you want about a club run, say, but it doesn't touch the experience of the run. It doesn't.
Well, we're back to allowing
There's some
both.
runners who would have the same numbers, say Gavin, and they would run in completely different ways. And
Yes,
the different styles, different going up hills and different going down hills, and some were better on the flats and some were better.
Maybe we should spend time talking about McGilchrist's left and right brain thing
Yeah,
because
we should do. Yeah,
it's
I did
endlessly
that when I
interesting.
was in hospital, actually.
Really? Oh well, that's well. My only fear is I haven't grasped. Yeah, I mean, I know the facts, and indeed, if I can, I was one. Can I boast for a moment? So I was once invited by to a private seminar of 10 academics to interrogate Peterson and McGilchrist on their ideas, and
Oh, really? Wow.
half of the academics were Christians, which included me, and the other half were not Christians.
Mm,
And neither Peterson nor McGilchrist had come out at all. Not even half, as they're both half out now. But at the time, they were
mm,
not. And part of the purpose of the seminar was those of us who were Christians were privately informed was to press them hard on the implications of their thought,
yeah.
because the telos of the thought of both of
Mm,
them was so
was-
fundamentally Christian that it was
yes.
partly our job in interrogation. I was put next to Peterson at lunchtime with a specific responsibility of converting him from Christianity via a shared conversation with Jung, but unfortunately, well, it didn't happen. Anyway, I tried.
You tried to
But
turn it.
I'm so sorry. I've anecdotally hijacked the conversation and got it away from cooperative dance, this movement into sex, back to maps of meaning. But let's go to devices and Nazis and devices, or we'll run out of time. And it's such a good piece. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Do you want to do you want to give some context, because it, it,
Well, just you've written well. No, I think the context is the shock of the fact that. Well, what we will do while we're talking is I'll put in a picture of the.
oh yeah,
I can splice in.
it
I've
explains it.
already Yes, I've already taken a copy of it, so I'll splice it in while you're talking, and people, as you're talking, people will see a picture
Well,
of the embodied swastika.
my myself and my son moved into this flat in August of 2017, and we didn't notice that a building nearby. I won't dox myself, but a building nearby, yeah, it was pointed out to us, was shaped like a swastika. Now, by the way, some people have got in touch with me to say that I don't know what I'm talking about, and the swastika isn't a Nazi symbol. I think they've missed the point of the.
Oh, but what they're saying in their pretentiousness is it has a very ancient archetypal heritage in the
Yeah,
world of Indian Hinduism, and it does, but that's not the point.
I thought I was making a joke, but apparently
The trouble is you can't
I
make
was
a joke
correct.
with people who have no sense of humor,
So
which
I
is
was wondering. I was wondering if I'd been surreptitiously, if Wiltshire Council or Homes for Wiltshire, whatever they're called, had moved us next to a Nazi compound. So I decided. A friend of mine said, You've had that article in your head for 8 years. Why don't you write it? Because it's
Hmm.
so anyway. I'm associate editor of a magazine called Country Squire, and this is coming out in Country Squire tomorrow, which we're recording this on Wednesday, so it's coming out Thursday. Only Country Squire would publish something as crazy as this. So anyway, this is my account of Are There Nazis in Devizes?
Cue picture.
Cue picture. Okay. Right. Like many people, possibly even the majority, I don't have much time for Nazis. The comedian Norm Macdonald said of Adolf Hitler that he didn't really care for him at all, and I see no reason to disagree with this. There might have been some early years comedic opportunities with the Nazis, but these are pretty much run dry by about 1933 and now seem very tired, very been there, done that, bought the t shirt, quite literally in certain parts of South London, I understand. But it's good to be vigilant about these things, and nobody wants to live next to a Nazi compound. I suspect that the Nazi diaspora is not restricted to South America or Scotland. I don't know why I mentioned Scotland. I think I was just trying to wind Scottish people. Anyway, it's not restricted to South America or Scotland, and that here in the West Country we have reasons to be concerned. Cue picture. Now, I'm reluctant to dox myself. I'll just say this. I'll just say that this swastika-inspired, shaped community of flats isn't too far from where I live. And in case you think I've relapsed and I'm drinking again, this has in fact been reported in the national press. There's a link to that. Some background. Devizes is a small and quirky market town in Wiltshire, situated close to Salisbury Plain and not far from Stonehenge. We have hauntings, a castle, a well-known system of canal locks, a labyrinth of secret tunnels, food markets, document incidents of alien, i.e. demonic interaction, a Wetherspoons, and the usual casual pagan occultism. Do we have a Nazi problem as an added layer of eccentric multiculturalism? I rather fear that we do. We know that the Nazis had a charming practice of architectural signatory, so it shouldn't be surprising that they would announce themselves in this way. They are, also adept in the ways of pettifogging red tape and quite capable of holding their own in a dust-up with local government building regulations, which would have been counter-creative even when the structure was at the planning stage many decades ago. So kudos, or the German equivalent, for that. Surveillance reports on the residents of that building, conducted by me mainly, compiled over several years, also give cause for concern. These people keep to themselves, speak rudimentary English, have dogs, I've just added that bit, come and go at strange hours, start fires, do not work, and exist solely for procreation and the initiation of a fresh cycle of pretty much the same. They are, if you like, what left-wing people call net contributors, and are therefore to be avoided at all costs. A word about cars and the parking thereof. Since it became harder, unless you're a criminal, to get hold of a gun, cars have become a symbol of new forms of aggression, and creative parking has become a new type of swagger. And perhaps any suppressed impulse towards authoritarianism will be expressed in a willingness to stick a vehicle where it was most definitely not intended to be, i.e. communal play areas, pavements, patches of greenery, etc. If, and I say no more than that, this is also what the anthropologists call an indicator of totalitarian thinking, then certain groups of young men in Devizes have a prima facie case to answer. A caveat. The Nazis in Devizes, if so they be, have deviated from the Aryan ideal in significant ways. Which is to say, they tend to be extremely overweight women who are vaping and pushing. Anyway, never mind. Whether this is a falsification of the underpinning eugenicist metaphysics or just simple disguise, I am not yet in a position to say. There is no evidence of any liking for Wagner. If there is a fondness for literature, then that's kept under wraps. Devizes Nazis, if that's what these people are, do not walk around with a copy of Beyond Good and Evil or Origin of Species ostentatiously tucked under an arm. Whether Nazi culture, like culture generally, has also suffered from the postmodernist corruption, or whether this is the usual repudiation of heritage is, again, not for me to speculate about. So what to do about it? Perhaps the Devizes Nazis, if that's what we're dealing with, are as entitled to protection as all other minority groups. We know from the whole Islam business that the hate laws are there now to protect ideologies as much as anything else. And say what you want about Nazis, they were pretty ideological. They were almost fanatic about it, in fact. I guess that being a Catholic supernaturalist, and therefore a moral objectivist, I at least have a deposit of faith and a tradition of teaching which allows me, without blushing, to call these people out. The relativists, utilitarians, and multiculturalists, for whom there is only in fact one culture, of course, that of rigorously applied national suicide, have no such luxury. How ironic that the Nazis in Devizes, if we have any, are protected at least theoretically by the gratuitous extension of public order legislation to areas of private opinion about which the state should not really have any say, unless that state is a fascist one, of course. The plot thickens.
I think that's one of the funniest pieces of writing I've heard in a very long time. I think Private Eye ought to carry it. The Spectator ought to. You should send it to these people. And
I've given up sending stuff to pitching to the Spectator, Gavin. You
yeah,
don't even get a reply. My
No,
friend Michael Orlovsky, who writes for the Telegraph on matters to do with AI and business, said to me when I met up with him in London that the Spectator is basically a group of friends with a magazine attached.
yes, yes, and Private Eye has its own internal culture, and the print's too small. But anyway, what I meant to say was that deserves to be very widely read. It's extremely funny.
Thank you. It wasn't meant to be.
It just slipped out that
It's okay
way.
for you. I have to live among these people.
Well, that
No, I
the only
appreciate
way of
that. Thank you.
the only way of living in such circumstances is to develop a very black sense of humour, and so that was wonderful.
The final thing
Well,
to say before we go, going back to the, if this is all right, going back to the discussion between Dawkins and Rowan
Rowan
Williams.
Williams.
Dawkins mangled that solipsism joke with Bertrand Russell. Did you notice?
No,
Well,
go on.
there's a story that I don't think it's anecdotal either. I think Bertrand Russell published a collection of letters, a collection of correspondence between himself and people who just wrote to him. He was a very vigilant replier when it came to correspondence. It was Scruton. Scruton said about Bertrand Russell that he was an aristocrat but not a gentleman. But he was quite diligent when it came to replying to letters. He received a letter from a woman who said that I don't know where she got this from, but she'd heard that Russell was now a solipsist. And she was delighted by this because she was a solipsist as well. And she just wished more people were solipsists. Dawkins told that joke even worse than I did. But can I tell you my favourite philosophy joke?
You do, yes.
And it's not even a joke. There was a New York philosopher called Sidney Morgenbesser, who was, I can say this, he was very Jewish because he had very Jewish humour. And he was known for his one-liners. He was a very competent philosopher of science, but didn't publish very much, but was very funny. And this is true. This is true. He was in a seminar given by the Oxford Ordinary Language philosopher J.L. Austin. I say seminar, it's probably a paper. And apparently he was stood at the back of the room. And Austin, who was phenomenally boring, said that it was a fact that in English, it was the case that you could put two negative concepts together and create a positive. Two negatives could make a positive. But you could not put two positives together to get a negative. And Morgan Besser's voice could be heard coming from the back of the room going, yeah, yeah.
That again is very funny. I wondered how you're going to pull that
True.
rabbit out of the hat.
True.
Very good. No, it is true. Yeah, it is. It is. Yes, absolutely.
I wonder if he was waiting all his professional life to be able to trot that line out.
Well, he obviously been thinking about it, or he wouldn't have had it to hand. But anyway, so yes, it must have been pre-cooked.
Wittgenstein said that a book of philosophy could be written consisting entirely of jokes.
That would be very good. I do think too. We need to discuss.
Not by him, though. Not by him.
No. I keep on feeling guilty about wanting to prove that I know the difference between early Wittgenstein and late Wittgenstein, particularly when you bring it up. But I think that would just be a piece of.
Some philosophers say that David Pears, the Oxford philosopher, used to write that there's actually more overlap than people thought, that there was a line of intellectual thought from the early to the later writings.
Well,
I don't know that personally, but
you'd hope there would be. I mean, if you really liked the man, well, he's so influential. I mean, because the real reason of making the distinction is that the pretentious people quote him without knowing that there are two theories and two minds, and they're opposed. They effectively oppose each other. So you can see why people who love him would want to suggest there was some degree of internal coherency to be traced out. Except that why shouldn't you think one thing at the beginning of your life and another thing at the end? It's just I like what he thought at the beginning better than what he thought at the end.
Well, he wrote the Tractatus when he was in the trenches during the First World War. I mean, he was slightly distracted, probably.
Yes. Well, that's. I mean, that's another whole conversation. Well, on that happy note, we should probably.
And it was G.E. Moore, I think, was his. He submitted the Tractatus as, like Howard, my former supervisor, said he was going to do with his first book. He submitted the Tractatus for a degree for a doctorate at Cambridge because he had to have it to teach there. And the examiner was G.E. Moore. And G. Moore's comment, and G. Moore wasn't known for his sense of humour, but this was quite a good one. I think it was Moore. Yes, let's go with Moore. He said, I have no doubt that Mr. Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico Philosophicus is a work of philosophical genius. Nevertheless, it deserves to be awarded a PhD at the University of Cambridge. Which I thought was
Oh,
good.
oh, that's lovely. That's extremely funny. I've got anecdotes flooding into my mind, but I think I better, can we just say to the 12, we have an audience of 12, 12 kind people who find our conversation enlivening and interesting. And we know that they are richly eccentric like us, and we thank them for listening to us all the way through.
I don't know.
We
I'm very
we,
grateful.
we I enjoy these conversations a great deal, and it makes me feel less lonely to know that there are at least a dozen people out there who share our interests. So for
Well, look,
those dozen of you, thank you.
we've talked about the theology of matter, and I think it needs to be talked about more. So, all right, we may not have done it as adequately as we could have done, but we've done it, and I think that's a good thing. And we've had some fun.
We have it is such fun, and I just miss university life so much um, because of there were people with whom you could have the most, like you, Dr. Walsh, you could have the most interesting conversations, and you wouldn't feel guilty about it. And you'd always learn some things about it, and it was a bit like playing in a squash club. You just meet some very athletic and competent people and say, "Wow, that's a beautiful stroke or fantastic game." There's something very lovely about the athleticism. We're back to the choreography of mental dance of the human mind. But we better stop, or else I'm just sorry we can't lift the jar together. We should go to the pub now.
Well, I can't drink, but I mean,
Oh no, of course you maximum insensitivity on my part. I'm
no,
so
not really,
sorry.
because you didn't specify what we will lift a jar. We will have a.
It doesn't have to be
This before,
alcohol.
we'll meet up for a cup of tea.
Absolutely, a jar of tea would be very nice, or ginger ale with no alcohol in it.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Yeah, no, I'm very fond of good ginger ale. Yes, good. Well, l'chaim, as they say.
Thank you to everyone for listening. Go and
Thank you.
find
Yes.
12 more people.
Well, they'll come to us. And anyway, it's we don't want this to be too popular, otherwise it'll be misunderstood. What we know that only people who are capable of understanding it will have
Although, do
stayed with us.
you remember The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin?
Yes,
He
very well.
starts that shop called Grot, determined that it will fail, to selling stuff, and he actually becomes a millionaire out of it.
Yes, that's right. Well, so which reminds me, if you like this, please like and share, and then we can become millionaires. That would be wonderful.
Mm.
Right. God bless you. Love. Thank you so much. Same time next week, I hope.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gavin.
Bye for now.